All right, so we're on the interstate heading back from Aiken, South Carolina, where we attended a bond hearing for Rhett Riviere. He is the central figure in the Airbnb voyeurism scandal that we've been covering for the last few days. Actually, the story dates back to last year when Riviere was charged on a pair of voyeurism counts. Earlier today, he was arrested and charged with additional counts of voyeurism. Basically, he's accused of setting up video systems inside rental properties he owns and recording guests as they undressed, as they engaged in sexual intercourse, other acts. And again, we are told that there are some underage victims in this case. Now, Riviere appeared before a magistrate in Aiken. He was given a $10,000 personal recognizance bond on the two charges. That means he does not have to put up any money. The judge is taking him at his word that he will appear for his court hearing, which is scheduled for September. That was vigorously objected to by victim's attorney Debbie Barbier, and I wanted to cut real quick to Barbier's impassioned arguments before the judge today.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. This is Debbie Barbier for the victims in this case, Mr. and Mrs. Crespo. Your Honor, first of all, I'd like to make sure there's an audio recording of this proceeding running because I need to request a copy of it.
There is an audio recording
Pursuant to the Victims' Bill of Rights, which is located in South Carolina Constitution, Article 1, Section 24, the victims have a right to be reasonably informed and be allowed to submit either a written or oral statement at all hearings affecting bail or bond. Ms. Crespo was not afforded this right. We were informed yesterday at 10:30 in the morning by SLED that there would be a hearing on his bond at 9:30 Friday morning. We have made plans according for that. Ms. Crespo is a nurse at the Aiken County Regional Medical Center. She's at work today. They are very short-staffed due to COVID, and she's not able to attend today. And I informed the court of this issue, and we were denied the right for her to be here, and denied the right for her to have a reasonable opportunity to write a written statement. In addition, Your Honor, Ms. Julianne Foster, who was the victim in the other case, I believe under the Victims' Bill of Rights, had a right to be notified of his rearrest, and she was not notified either, and I have not had an opportunity since I only got a few hour notices of the hearing. And so, Your Honor, we object to these proceedings taking place. We ask that this hearing be scheduled at 9:30 tomorrow morning as we were informed by SLED. That would have been within the 24-hour window from his arrest, and it would have been perfectly legal for that to have occurred. We were not given this option, and so as accordingly, Ms. Crespo has been deprived the right under the South Carolina Victim Bill of Rights. Now, Your Honor, in addition, I would like to address the issue of whether Mr. Riviere is a flight risk and whether Mr. Riviere is a danger to the community. Your Honor, in our civil case in July of 2021, on July 26, 2021, we made a motion to inspect, examine, and independently test the evidence that had been obtained from Rhett Riviere by SLED. That included computers, cell phones, thumb drives, cameras, video cameras, SD memory cards, and other electronic devices. On September 16th, 2021, the Circuit Court judge granted our motion for this inspection. In June of this year, June 1st of 2022, we had a meeting with SLED to inspect the evidence. Shortly thereafter, we were provided a hard drive of forensic images that were taken from Mr. Riviere's devices. We have hired a forensic team to review these devices and determined what these devices contained. And within the brief period of time thus far that we've had to review these devices, they contain thousands of videos. Some of these videos contain videos of young girls undressing in bedrooms, young girls undressing in bathrooms, people who do not know they're being filmed, like the Crespos, having sexual encounters in bedrooms. They include, people who have no idea that they're in his rental houses and on his boat who are being filmed. And so, Your Honor, we believe that after we found this information out, we immediately scheduled a meeting with SLED. We were able to identify a few of the victims thus far. We are still working on identifying more victims. We believe there are many, many victims in this case, and we believe this goes to his danger to the community. He is a grave danger to this community. It is impossible to overstate his danger to this community. We believe he is a predator. We believe he is dangerous to people. People have testified in this case that they are scared of him and that other people are scared of him. And there are no telling how many people he has victimized in this case.
Ma'am.
As to the flight risk factor,
Wait. Okay, let's move on, because I'm just addressing the two charges that I have before me today. And there's an objection to your continue. Go ahead, Mr. McCullough.
Your Honor, I will only say this, and I regret that if she cannot hear me, I'll be happy
She can now.
to reiterate. There are only two issues before you
can't hear
today.
him.
Can you speak up a little bit?
There are but two issues for the court at every bond hearing. Flight risk, a danger of appearance, and a danger to the community. Any individualized danger or a danger at large. What you're hearing, Your Honor, is a speech to the bleachers, and I object to it for that reason. It is unnecessary. I haven't heard one thing that goes to either of those considerations, which are uniquely your issues. Thank you.
Sustained. Ma'am, address the danger to the community.
Your Honor, as to the flight risk, there is a mountain of evidence against Mr. Revere. He has millions of dollars that he could flee with. He has, if that happens and he flees, none of the victims in this case will receive justice. He has inflicted millions of dollars of pain on these people, and they deserve the right to have their day in court. And so I would submit to Your Honor that he must be required to surrender his passport. He should be on electronic monitoring. He should have no contact with any victim in this matter, anybody that he's ever videotaped, and he would be uniquely in possession of that knowledge, and that he have no access to the internet. I would also ask, Your Honor, that because of his danger to the community and because he's a flight risk, his bond should be set very high and commensurate with his ability to flee, which would be, you know, at least a $10 million bond.
Okay. Ma'am.
RBA obviously very fired up on this case. The next clip I want to cut to one of the victims in this case, Gabriel Crespo. Crespo addressed the judge about his views on whether or not Revere should be granted bond. Here's that clip.
Yes, Your Honor, it's Crespo, C-R-E-S-P-O. And I'm quite disappointed of the whole proceedings here. Sorry, English is my second language. I'm from Argentina. I've been a member of this community since bought a place in 2001 when I was renting for Mr. Revere here in Aiken. This is my town. And this man is dangerous. This man is a predator. I'm raising my daughter in this town. This man, 10 years after he filmed me having sex with my wife at the time and in the bathroom, naked, offered his car to take my daughter and I on a parade because my daughter was singing the national anthem in downtown Aiken. I find that a little weird, don't you? This man should not be in the same restaurant as my daughter and I were last Friday night down in Aiken, in a new restaurant. So he ruined my dinner with my daughter, just showing up in the same restaurant where I was. This man should not be part of our community, ma'am. This man should be put away and given us justice. This is like unbelievable. It takes me 10 days for me to get to this point where we are right now. I went to the SLED officer was too busy to talk to me on Monday the 18th. So we went to the, city of whatever, and they all know we have a conflict of interest because Mr. Revere donates money and horses to the, I'm like, what? A conflict of interest? I mean, this is like unbelievable the way the SLED and the Mr. Bill right here is handling this. It's unreal.
The finally, we've got a clip from Columbia, South Carolina attorney Joe McCullough, who appeared in court on behalf of Riviere. Here's his argument.
The accused, Mr. Riviere, has a right to speedy bond consideration. We appreciate the court according him that. The Victims' Rights Bill, in my opinion, and I've only been at this about a half a century. I've been a prosecutor as well as a defense lawyer in many, many cases, state and federal cases, as Ms. Barbier has. But my recollection of the Victims' Rights Bill is that it would not accord to other victims that have been serviced by previous warrants that Mr. Weeks mentioned and the court's aware of. They're entitled to notifications in their cases, and so I don't think there's any dereliction of duty or violation of the rules. Certainly all the victims' interests, including the victims who were subject of these forms, the only two that are before you today, they have been ably represented by the dramatic and passionate presentation of Ms. Barbier. I don't know what the difference between today and tomorrow is, except that a person only accused of a crime might have had to spend the night in jail to accommodate victims who could have appeared by telephone, WebEx, or taking the day off from work to come here. But I'm not being critical of them, but I think, that all the passionate display we've heard takes us away from the two central issues. And Your Honor, important to note, these two new charges are charges that involve alleged conduct going all the way back to 2001, 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago. The charges that he is presently out on a personal recognizance bond were charges relating to time periods, I think, allegedly in 1819, is that right?
2018.
18. But Your Honor, most importantly and pertinently, these charges do not represent bond violations. They're not revocable. They are not activities that would allow the court to revoke bond by reason of a violation of the bond. In fact, and to the contrary, since Mr. Riviere has been released on bond, he has conformed in every conceivable way. To my knowledge, there has been no violation reported to Mr. Weeks' office, and he'll certainly tell us if there have been. No violations reported to SLID, who are represented here today. No violations of any type of the law. He has no violent history whatsoever, Your Honor. He has these allegations. And of course, the only two things for your consideration today are, again, danger to the community and danger of flight. As Mr. Weeks has indicated, we certainly have already said we will surrender a passport as soon as he is able to be released on a reasonable bond. He will go home, fetch that up, and Mr. Hart's office will make sure that's delivered before the close of business. Secondly, we certainly will agree to a no contact rule with Mr. Cresco and whatever other, I haven't had time to study on the warrants, but so I think there may be 2 or 3 victims, husband and wife, 2. So, Your Honor, we have no difficulty with that, and I will explain to Mr. Riviere that if he happened to walk into a restaurant and saw that Cresco's there, it's his duty to leave, to honor and respect the court if the court imposes that on as a condition. He's a lifetime resident. He has no criminal history of violence. There is not one iota of information or evidence presented to you today, because it's not in existence, that he's a flight risk. But we're happy to surrender the passport because he had no current travel plans. He has demonstrated while on bond his ability to conform. I have no doubt he will continue to conform in these 2 new charges, which are unfortunate. They do not add to the measure of his responsibility to this court that he's demonstrated since whenever these charges were originally brought against him. So, Your Honor, having said all of that, I would ask the court to consider an unsecured bond of some variety, but certainly demanding a $10 million bond, I have a little difficulty with even the notion that that's a responsible request for this court. I believe, Your Honor, a personal recognizance bond is reasonable. That has worked in the past. There's not one thing shown you today other than this carefully choreographed display that would suggest that that's not a reasonable bond. And I would hope, Your Honor, to see you criticized because you do what your job requires, justice and fairness. Thank you.
So as you can tell from those clips, the big issue of this bond hearing was notification, and whether or not the victims in this case had sufficient notification to let their voices be heard in the bond hearing against Riviere. Now, this is a state constitutional issue. Victims have rights under the state constitution, but unfortunately, the Constitution is not as specific as it could be regarding what constitutes reasonable notification. So that gives judges all kinds of leeway in deciding on the facts of a case. You can have facts that are glaringly obvious one way or glaringly obvious the other way, but the judge is not really bound by the facts because the Constitution doesn't really have much in the way of specificity as to what constitutes reasonable notification. Again, this is going to be very important moving forward because as we have continued to hear from law enforcement sources, from attorneys close to this case, and from victims themselves, there are going to be a lot of victims in this case. Rhett Riviere allegedly taped people for more than 2 decades at multiple locations. And again, in addition to the criminal charges he's facing, there's a civil case which names Airbnb as one of the co-defendants. So it's going to be very interesting to follow that case because we've been looking at the pleadings in that civil case, and once again, it's a situation where the law hasn't really caught up with the technology. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how the courts are going to handle this case involving Airbnb as a corporate defendant. Anyway, for the latest on the civil case, as well as the criminal charges against Rhett Riviere, keep it tuned to FITSNews as we bring you the very latest on the Airbnb voyeurism scandal out of Aiken, South Carolina.